Please. No.
Courtrooms are where justice is served, or at least that's the idea. They're usually about legal debates, emotional outbursts, and the occasional dramatic twist. But violence? That's not supposed to be part of the script. Yet sometimes, the unexpected happens. What if victims, fueled by rage, turned the tables? What if the accused met their end right there in the courtroom? From a man beaten to death by 300 women seeking justice to a criminal who took his own life mid-trial, these are the shocking moments when convicts met their fate instantly in court. Number 9. Aku Yadav. More than 200 women showed up in the court just to kill this man, Aku Yadav. Why? Well, we're here to answer. Aku grew up in a Nagpur slum, starting out as the son of a milkman. He climbed the criminal ladder in Kasturba Nagar, turning into a gangster. He didn't just stop at stealing or threatening people. Aku terrorized the neighborhood for over 13 years. His crimes: extortion, home invasions, brutal assaults, kidnappings, and even murder. Aku assaulted over 40 women and girls. The police, instead of arresting Aku, they protected him. He paid them off with bribes, showered them with drinks, and in return, they turned a blind eye. For over a decade, Aku terrorized the slum with zero consequences. It got so bad that locals said almost every other house in the area had someone who had suffered at his hands. But Aku made a big mistake when he crossed paths with a woman named Usha Narayana. When Aku tried to threaten her, Usha didn't back down. Inspired by her courage, a mob rose up and burned down Aku's house. Now terrified for his life, Aku ran to the police, not to turn himself in, but to ask for protection. They arrested him, supposedly for his own safety, and scheduled a bail hearing. Word spread through the slum that Aku might be released. The women, his victims, weren't about to let that happen. On August 13, 2004, hundreds of them marched to the Nagpur District Court. They carried vegetable knives and chili powder. When Aku walked into the courtroom, he was as arrogant as ever. He even mocked one of the women he had assaulted, calling her a prostitute and threatening to hurt her again. And guess what? The police laughed. The woman he mocked didn't hold back. She took off her sandal and started hitting him right there in the courtroom. She shouted, "It's either you or me. We can't both live on this earth together." That was the breaking point. The women in the courtroom snapped. They lunged at Aku, stabbing him repeatedly, at least 70 times. They threw chili powder in his face and even in the faces of the police officers who were supposed to guard him. But the women weren't done. They passed their knives around, each one making sure to land a blow. Aku's screams for mercy filled the room, but no one stopped. He begged for forgiveness, saying he'd never hurt anyone again, but it was too late. 15 minutes later, Aku was dead. His blood stained the marble floors and walls of the courtroom, and as if that wasn't enough, the mob continued attacking his lifeless body. The women later claimed the attack wasn't planned. One of them said, "We didn't have formal meetings, but word spread that we had to act together." And act they did. Number 8. Perry Manley. Perry was a Navy veteran, but his real battle wasn't on a battlefield, it was in courtrooms. This man took the term "fighting the system" to a whole new level. For 15 long years, Perry was consumed by one thing: child support. He hated it. To him, being forced to pay for his 3 kids, who lived with his ex-wife, felt like modern-day slavery. He called it involuntary servitude and said it wasn't fair that he had to work to support kids he wasn't raising. He filed 5 lawsuits and joined groups advocating for fathers' rights. His bitterness grew with every year, every dollar garnished from his paycheck, and every rejection from the courts. But Perry didn't stop at lawsuits. He wrote about his anger constantly, spilling his frustrations onto paper and the internet. His obsession became his identity. Fast forward to Father's Day. Perry shows up at the federal courthouse in Seattle. He's wearing camouflage with a backpack strapped across his chest and clutching a hand grenade, a World War II era grenade. His target? Attention. Perry was desperate to make a statement. He tried sneaking past the metal detectors by shimmying along a narrow ledge around an indoor reflection pond. But security spotted him immediately. They saw the grenade and panicked. Within minutes, the place was swarming with police and marshals. Officers begged him to surrender, but Perry wasn't budging. Instead, he placed some papers on the floor, likely documents about his grievances, and held the grenade tightly against his chest with both hands. For over 20 minutes, the standoff dragged on. Tensions were sky high. Was the grenade real? Was Perry a threat? No one could tell. Perry made a sudden move with the grenade, and that was it. 2 officers opened fire, once with a shotgun, once with an assault rifle. Perry was killed instantly, and the grenade wasn't even active. The bottom had been drilled out, making it harmless. But the officers had no way of knowing that in the heat of the moment. To make things even stranger, Perry's backpack wasn't filled with explosives like they feared. Instead, it held a cutting board and his living will. Police later speculated that Perry wasn't there to harm anyone but himself. They called it suicide by cop. It made sense, especially since he had brought his living will along as if he knew how the day would end. Perry wasn't just a random troublemaker though, he was a well-known figure at that courthouse. He had even accused a federal judge, Thomas Zilli, of treason in a letter just months earlier. Perry claimed the judge's actions deserved the death penalty. That letter got him on the radar of federal marshals who visited him shortly after. Judge Zilli later called Perry's death tragic, but what can you say about a man who believed the only way to be heard was through such drastic measures? Perry's life was complicated to say the least. He had been jailed twice for refusing to pay child support. At one point, he lived in a homeless shelter for veterans in Seattle's Chinatown district. Even there, he was unforgettable, always wearing fatigues, always fighting his war against the system. He sued the state, his former employers, and anyone he thought was violating his rights. His final lawsuit, filed in 2003, was dismissed just like the others. It seemed like the world had stopped listening to Perry long before he stepped into that courthouse for the last time. And that's where his story ends, a man consumed by anger, fighting battles no one else could see, leaving behind a legacy of questions and chaos. Number 7. Michael Marvin. Michael Marvin wasn't just any guy, he was a Yale-educated lawyer, a Wall Street hotshot, and an adventurer who once stood atop Mount Everest. But his life ended in the most shocking and dramatic way imaginable, in the middle of a courtroom. Marvin grew up in Oak Harbor, Washington, as a member of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. After graduating from Brigham Young University, he took his ambition to Yale Law School, where he built the foundation for an impressive career in high finance. In the 80s and 90s, he worked with some of the biggest names on Wall Street, Lehman Brothers, Merrill Lynch, and Salomon Brothers. His job was advising on complex investments, particularly in Asia. He lived the kind of life most people only dream about. He owned a multi-million-dollar mansion in Arizona, a collection of fine art that included etchings by Picasso and endless trips to the Far East. He summited the highest peaks on 6 continents, including Mount Everest in 2001. This guy wasn't just living life, he was conquering it. But as we all know, life doesn't remain perfect the whole time. Marvin's mansion, a symbol of his lavish lifestyle, mysteriously went up in flames. Investigators weren't convinced it was an accident. He was charged with arson and insurance fraud, accused of setting his own house on fire to collect a fat insurance payout. The trial began on May 21, 2012, and the stakes were sky high. If convicted, Marvin faced 7 to 21 years in prison. Fast forward to June 28, 2012, the day of the verdict. The jury found him guilty. The moment those words were read, Marvin's demeanor changed. Courtroom footage shows him closing his eyes, covering his face, and then putting something in his mouth followed by a drink. Within seconds, he collapsed to the floor, jerking violently. Marvin was rushed to a hospital in Phoenix, but it was too late. The autopsy later confirmed what many suspected. He had taken a lethal dose of cyanide. In the span of minutes, Michael Marvin had gone from a man convicted of arson to someone who orchestrated his own shocking exit. At the time of his death, Marvin was a father of 4 and a grandfather of 2. His life, once filled with adventure and luxury, ended in tragedy and disbelief, leaving behind a trail of questions. Number 6. Nathaniel Richmond. Imagine waking up to the sound of gunshots right outside a courthouse. That's exactly what happened one morning in Steubenville, Ohio, when a man named Nathaniel Richmond decided to take matters into his own hands in a shocking and violent act. Nathaniel Richmond, 51, was the father of Malik Richmond, one of 2 high school football players convicted in 2013 for assaulting a 16-year-old girl after a party fueled by alcohol. Nathaniel had been outspoken in supporting his son, even after the conviction. But on this fateful day, Nathaniel wasn't just showing up to support his son's case. No, he was about to make headlines for an entirely different reason. At around 8 a.m., as Judge Joseph Bruzzese Jr. was arriving at the courthouse for work, Nathaniel ambushed him. Richmond opened fire on the judge without warning, but the judge wasn't helpless. Bruzzese, who was armed, didn't just take the attack, he fought back, shooting at Richmond. A probation officer, who was behind the judge, also fired shots. In total, Richmond fired 5 shots, and Bruzzese fired 5 back. After the shooting, Bruzzese was airlifted to a hospital and survived. He was stable after undergoing surgery, and it's expected that he'll make a full recovery. Meanwhile, a man who was with Richmond in the car at the time was injured by a ricochet and taken to the hospital. But when the dust settled, Richmond was dead, right there outside the courthouse. Now, what's strange is that Nathaniel Richmond didn't have anything to do with Judge Brazzi personally. The judge wasn't involved in his son's case, nor was he linked to any of the criminal history that Nathaniel had. But there was still a connection. Richmond had been in trouble with the law himself. In fact, he had a history that included assault and attempted murder charges. But still, why did he go after the judge? That part remains a mystery. Number 5. Klaus Grabowski. Meet Marianne, who's also known as the Revenge Mother, did something in the courtroom that stunned the entire world. But why? For that, we'll need to rewind a bit. Marianne Bachmeier is a woman with a complicated life. She grew up in a strict, conservative home with deeply religious parents. Things took a turn for the worse when her parents divorced, and her mom remarried a man Marianne described as a controlling stepfather. It wasn't long before Marianne was kicked out of the house. At just 16, Marianne had her first child, but she made the difficult decision to give the baby up for adoption. A couple of years later, she became pregnant again, this time by her boyfriend. Around the same time, she endured a deeply traumatic event, and her second baby was also placed for adoption. Life wasn't kind to her, but Marianne kept going. By the age of 22, she became pregnant for the third time. This time, she chose to keep her baby, and in 1972, she welcomed Anna, a bright and lively little girl. Marianne raised Anna on her own, juggling motherhood and her job at a local pub. Anna often tagged along to the bar, even sleeping there while Marianne worked. Marianne herself admitted she struggled with balancing her lifestyle and motherhood, even considering adoption for Anna at one point. Despite these challenges, Anna was described as a vibrant child who brought joy to those around her. But everything changed on May 5th, 1980. Anna was just 7 years old when she had a small fight with her mom and decided to skip school. That's when she visited the home of Klaus Grabowski, a man she'd met before while playing with his cats. Grabowski wasn't a safe man to be around. He had a criminal history, including serious offenses involving children. On that day, he lured Anna into his home and held her there for hours. In a horrifying act, he ended Anna's young life and wrapped her up in a box, which was later discovered. His fiancée eventually turned him in to the police. Grabowski claimed he was afraid Anna would tell her mom what had happened, and he didn't want to face consequences for his actions. Fast forward to March 6, 1981. It was the third day of Grabowski's trial in Lübeck, Germany. Marianne sat quietly in the courtroom, devastated by the loss of her daughter. But she wasn't just there to watch. Marianne had smuggled a small gun into the courthouse. When Grabowski turned his back, Marianne stood up, pulled out the gun, and fired 7 times. 6 bullets hit him, and he died almost instantly. Marianne calmly put down the gun and allowed herself to be taken into custody without a struggle. Her actions made headlines around the world. Some people were horrified, arguing that vigilante justice has no place in a civilized society. But others saw Marianne as a grieving mother pushed to her breaking point. Messages of support, flowers, and gifts poured in from people who understood her pain. Marianne went to trial, initially facing a murder charge. However, the charge was reduced, and after weeks of negotiations, she was sentenced to 6 years in prison. She served 3 before being released. Years later, on September 17, 1996, Marianne passed away from pancreatic cancer at just 46 years old. She was laid to rest next to Anna, the daughter she loved so fiercely. Number 4. Slobodan Praljak. The man of many talents, staggering contradictions, stunned the entire world by killing himself in the courtroom. Praljak wasn't just your average guy, he was that guy who seemed to excel at everything. By the time he hit his early 30s, he had not 1, not 2, but 3 university degrees. In 1970, he graduated as an electrical engineer from the Faculty of Electrical Engineering in Zagreb, pulling off an impressive GPA of 4.55. Not satisfied with just being a tech genius, he followed it up by studying philosophy and sociology, graduating in 1971. And because why not, he added a 3rd degree in 1972, this time from the Zagreb Academy of Dramatic Art. Now, you'd think someone with this resume would settle into a steady, predictable career, right? Not Praljak. He wore many hats. He started as a professor and managed an electronics lab at a vocational school in Zagreb. After 1973, he dove headfirst into the arts as a freelance artist and became a theatre director, working in Zagreb, Osijek, and Mostar. But Praljak's life took a sharp turn in 1991 when the Croatian War of Independence broke out. That's when he voluntarily joined the Croatian Armed Forces. Not only did he join, but he also formed a unit made up of artists and intellectuals, holding positions in Sunja during the war. His leadership skills didn't go unnoticed. By April 1992, he was promoted to Major General, taking on high-ranking roles in the Ministry of Defense and other government bodies. However, Praljak's military career didn't end on a victorious note. Instead, it led to one of the most infamous chapters of his life. He was accused by the International Criminal Tribunal for the former Yugoslavia of commanding forces that committed mass atrocities against Bosnian Muslims between 1992 and 1994. On April 5, 2004, Praljak voluntarily surrendered. Despite the serious allegations, he stood his ground, pleaded not guilty, and decided to represent himself in court without a lawyer. The trial began in 2006, and by 2013, Praljak was sentenced to 20 years in prison. But the story didn't end there. On November 29, 2017, during his appeal judgment, Praljak stunned everyone in the courtroom. As the judges upheld his conviction, he stood up and declared, "Judges, Slobodan Praljak is not a war criminal. With disdain, I reject your verdict." And then, in a moment that left the world speechless, he drank a vial of poison right there in the courtroom. The hearing was immediately suspended and Praljak was rushed to a hospital. Tragically, he didn't survive. The Dutch authorities launched an investigation, declaring the courtroom a crime scene. After the war, he ventured into business, co-founding a company with his brother called Octavian. It started with producing films and television programs and publishing books, many of which were his own. Later, it expanded into real estate, managing a major business complex in Zagreb. By 2011, the company was thriving with millions in revenue. Praljak also owned stakes in other businesses, including a tobacco factory in Ljubuški. Number 3. David Paradiso. A 29-year-old man was on trial in Stockton, California. What for? For the act of stabbing his girlfriend, Eileen Pelt, in the neck and dumping her body by the roadside. David Paradiso wasn't just any defendant. This guy was a walking time bomb. On the day of the incident, he was on the witness stand, being grilled about why he killed his girlfriend. His response, "Because she deserved to die." His mother, Deborah, couldn't hold back. She stood up and started yelling. Now, as jurors were filling out, Paradiso did the unthinkable. He left the stand, walked behind Judge Fox, and suddenly attacked her. Out of nowhere, he had a weapon, some kind of sharp cutting tool. No one knows how he got it, but he didn't hesitate. He lunged at the judge, going straight for her neck, the same way he'd attacked his girlfriend. He lifted her from her seat, punching and stabbing relentlessly. The courtroom erupted into chaos. People screamed, bailiffs rushed in, and that's when Detective Eric Bradley stepped in. Bradley didn't think twice. He shot Paradiso on the spot, putting an end to the attack. Judge Fox, bloodied and injured, was rushed to the hospital with a bandage on her arm. Miraculously, she survived and was later released. The courthouse, however, went into lockdown. Paradiso's family had actually warned authorities 2 weeks earlier that he had a weapon and might smuggle it into court. His brother called him crazy and said they'd told everyone not to put him on the stand. His mother had even flagged that he might be hiding something sharp like a clipper or scissors, but no one listened and tragedy nearly struck. The circumstances of Paradiso's original crime were just as disturbing. Back in December 2006, he was in a car with his girlfriend Eileen and his mother driving. High on meth and paranoid, Paradiso stabbed Eileen in the neck, claiming he thought she was going to kill him first. After killing her, he forced his mother to drive to a remote spot in Amador County, where he dumped Eileen's body. Number 2. Jonathan Schmitz. The guy who killed someone just because they confessed their feelings to him. It was the 90s and reality TV was booming. The Jenny Jones show was all about juicy secrets, big surprises, and lots of drama. In March 1995, 24-year-old Jonathan Schmitz was invited to be a guest on the show. Why? To find out who had a secret crush on him. Jonathan was told by producers that his admirer could be either a man or a woman, but he later claimed they made it sound like it'd be a woman. Turns out his secret admirer was a 32-year-old man named Scott Amajor. During the taping, Scott publicly confessed his feelings for Jonathan. Jonathan, who identified as straight, was visibly surprised but managed to play it off, saying he was flattered. Just days after the taping, Scott left a sexually suggestive note on Jonathan's doorstep. Now, Jonathan wasn't just surprised, he was angry. On March 9, 1995, after finding the note, Jonathan went to a bank, withdrew some cash, and bought a shotgun. He then drove to Scott's home, confronted him, and asked, "Did you leave the note?" That smile was the breaking point. Jonathan went back to his car, grabbed a shotgun, returned to Scott's home, and shot him twice in the chest. Scott died on the spot. Immediately afterward, Jonathan called 911 and confessed to what he'd done. Jonathan's lawyers argued that he was suffering from mental illnesses, including bipolar disorder and Graves's disease, and claimed the whole situation pushed him over the edge. They even used the controversial gay panic defense, saying the humiliation Jonathan felt after the taping led to the murder. In 1996, Jonathan was found guilty of second-degree murder and sentenced to 25 to 50 years in prison, but it didn't end there. His conviction was overturned on appeal and he was retried. The second trial had the same outcome, guilty of second-degree murder. Jonathan eventually served over 2 decades in prison before being released on parole in August 2017. Scott's family sued The Jenny Jones Show, its production companies, and Warner Brothers, claiming the show's negligence played a part in Scott's death. The lawsuit put the show under intense scrutiny, and although the family won the case, the decision was later overturned. By that time though, the damage to the show's reputation was done, and it eventually stopped airing. Number 1. Cialo Angelo. Cialo Angelo, a 25-year-old member of the Tongan Crip gang, turned a seemingly ordinary trial into a scene of utter chaos. It all started like any other day in court. Angelo was sitting next to his defense attorney. No one had any clue about the storm brewing inside him. As the witness took the stand, Angelo made his move. He reached over, grabbed his attorney's pen, and in a flash, bolted toward the witness stand. Before anyone could react, Angelo leaped toward the witness, pen clenched in his fist, arm cocked and ready to strike. The witness, seeing the attack coming, jumped back just in time. Angelo, mid-leap, crashed feet first over the front of the stand. An unidentified US Marshal didn't wait for a second chance. 4 shots rang out, dropping Angelo right there in the courtroom. Screams erupted. A woman cried out in horror. Meanwhile, the bailiff wasted no time. He quickly blocked the courtroom's entrance, his hand hovering over his weapon, commanding everyone in the gallery to stay still. And as chaos unfolded, the judge, US District Judge Tina Campbell, was escorted out to safety. Somewhere in the frenzy, someone dialed 911, though the damage had already been done. Angelo had told the judge earlier that he'd behave, convincing her he didn't need to be shackled. His defense argued that putting him in handcuffs or restraints would prejudice the jury against him. But what next became a matter of heated debate. Angelo's family argued that the US Marshal used excessive force. After all, Angelo only had a pen. 4 shots, they said, was too much. But the court saw it differently. They ruled that the Marshal's actions were objectively reasonable under the circumstances. With Angelo vaulting the witness stand and attempting to attack someone, the Marshal had mere seconds to act. In their eyes, it was a justified use of force to stop a potentially deadly assault. This courtroom drama doesn't just end with Angelo's death. The trial was declared a mistrial. He had been the last of 17 defendants from a 2010 indictment involving the Tongan Crips. The charges? Assault, conspiracy, robbery, and weapons offenses. His co-defendants had already been sentenced to 10 to 30 years in prison. Angelo never got to hear his verdict. But what do you think? Which one of these dramas do you think was the most outrageous?